All right, we're all good. Go ahead, Megan.
All right, thank you, Dan. Can everybody hear me?
It's a little quiet. I don't know if you can turn up the microphone or maybe just speak a little louder.
Okay, how about this?
That sounds great.
Perfect, thank you. All right, we can get started. I just want to thank the past EABC for letting me present today. My slides are already posted on my blog if you'd like them. And if you have questions, please use the chat panel to ask questions, and I'll try to answer them probably at the end. A little bit about me. I'm a business intelligence solutions consultant with Longoria Consulting in Kansas City. I have had the pleasure of working in various industries doing BI work, and I am passionate about data visualization. I have a blog. It's datasavvy.wordpress.com, and you can find me on Twitter at @IdMarie. I just want to take a moment to thank my employer, Longoria Consulting, for letting me make time during the workday to do this. We're a Microsoft partner that works on BI solutions, content management with SharePoint, custom app dev, and Office 365 implementations. So through them, I've been able to work on a lot of interesting projects that have enhanced my skills and experiences that are included in some of the information that I am sharing with you today. Okay. So I just moved a couple of weeks ago. I stayed in the same city, but I moved to another part of town. And I love living close to downtown Kansas City, but certain parts of the city have a bad reputation as far as crime rate. So one of the things I look at are crime stats. And this is actually information for my last neighborhood from 2013. But this is an exploded donut chart. And if I use this to try to figure out what is the most common crime committed in my neighborhood, I bet it would take you a second to figure it out. It's a little difficult to reference back and forth between the legend and to understand which colors coordinate with which labels. So the data that I used for this actually comes from data.kcmo.org. It's open data from the city. And it's just a big Excel spreadsheet that provided all this information. But let's try this again. So this time, if I asked you, what is the most common crime committed in my neighborhood, I bet you could immediately tell me that it's non-aggravated assault. So I did a couple of things here differently. One, I used a bar chart. Then I ordered the bars in descending order by the percentage, actually. I changed it this time from just a total count to the percent of the total crimes, because my question was, what is the most common crime committed in my neighborhood? And in addition to that, I highlighted the amount, the top amount, so that it's very easy to find. Your eyes gravitate to it immediately. So why does this matter, outside of knowing what crimes happen in my neighborhood? At some point, you will probably have to create a report. I don't care if you're a DBA, a business analyst, a BI architect, an ETL developer, you'll probably have to create some kind of report. Or work with someone who does that a lot. And the way you display information to an end user can enhance all the great ETL data warehouse or application that you built, or render it nearly useless. That is what I hope you can take away from this. You can have the best data warehouse or application, and outside of ad hoc reporting, all your end users probably see of it is the user interface. And when you're talking about reports, that's the UI. If it's bad, users can associate that poor implementation of the reports with the rest of the BI solution. And you can't just, because you work in BI, say, oh, I must have this down. Data visualization is a skill. It is something that must be learned and studied and practiced to be able to get really good at it. It's just like any other UI design. People specialize in this. So now that you know that, the problem is most people don't know how to do this appropriately. And that can lead to, one, your audience just missing the point if you're not providing information in a way that helps them understand. But actually bad report design can mislead users. It can cause them to draw an incorrect conclusion from the data just by your data visualization design. So to kind of help you understand where I'm coming from, there is a great blog by Stephen Pugh. He's a data visualization expert. He actually focuses a lot on data visualization in businesses as opposed to academics. And his blog is perceptualedge.com. He's written several books, and his books, after reading them, actually changed the way that I look at data visualizations and definitely made me a better data professional. So I have a couple questions that I'd like you to look over. On this slide, just take a couple seconds to look at which graph makes it easier to determine whether mid-cap U.S. stock or small-cap U.S. stock has the greater share. So on the left, we have a pie chart, and it's multicolored, one color for each pie with the labels on the right. And then on the right, we have a bar chart, and you can see the actual numbers based on the scale at the bottom. People tend to like pie charts. They feel they're very familiar. But what I'm going to guess you do is you have to go back and forth to determine, oh, mid-cap U.S. stock is the blue one. Okay, now small-cap U.S. stock is the orange one. And you can't really tell. They're kind of the same size. When you look at the bar graph on the right, because they're ordered in descending order, it's very easy to tell that mid-cap U.S. stock is greater. And you can also tell by looking at the bars, because one is greater than 12% and one is less than 12%. It's very easy. So let's look at another one. One of these graphs accurately encodes the values, and the other one skews the values in a misleading manner. So on the left, this is the same data set, only the only difference is on the left, the scale starts at 2,000. And on the right, the scale starts at 0. So the graph on the left looks like the yes number is 2 or 3 times bigger than the no number, when it's really not. It's just a couple hundred different. Now imagine that in a business setting. What if you're looking at profitability? And you have a difference like that. You hand someone the graph on the left. That can really mislead someone into making a poor business decision. Because at the end of the day, the technology is nice. I love the technology involved with business intelligence, but the entire point of it is that you're communicating information in the business or within any organization. So last one. Which graph makes it easier to determine R&D's travel expenses? We see a 3D bar chart on the top, or what's called small multiples on the bottom. It's actually pretty difficult to determine the travel expenses for R&D because there's a big blue bar for R&D for sales, or for sales rather, that's blocking our view. So a way to get around that is to use small multiples. I can easily see where R&D is. I can compare travel across the different departments. I didn't lose any information. By the way, that quiz is available. If you download my slides, you'll have the link to it, and there are about 10 questions in it. And I would encourage you to go and take that quiz and see what score you get. So After deciding what kind of information you're trying to include in your report, you have to decide what type of visualization you want to use to communicate that information. And certain graphs are better suited for certain situations. So Stephen Pugh has a graph selection matrix that can help you decide. And when I first really got into this, I actually printed this out, and I guess I'm old school, hung it up, taped it to my cubicle wall so that I could easily reference it. There are a couple things that I hope you'll remember. Just because a graph exists doesn't mean you need to use it. If something cool and new comes out, the thing we want to focus on is communicating the information. You don't want to choose form over function. Your job is to communicate effectively whatever the intended information is, in addition to making something visually appealing, but don't lose sight of your goal. So a couple of tips are, in most cases, pie charts are really overused. We like them, they're round. You've been seeing them since you were a kid. You probably used them in kindergarten. But there are many situations where another graph choice is more appropriate. Also, there are some newer-ish graph types that could be really helpful to you. So we're going to take a look at this graph selection matrix. And I'll zoom in just for a second. What you can see is that you have the different types of graphs going down the left side and the kind of information you want to convey going across the top. For instance, you won't see a pie chart on this at all because Stephen Pugh thinks they are wildly overused. But when you want to see time series information, you're probably going to look at something like a line graph, maybe a vertical bar graph. You probably won't use a horizontal bar graph because our brains are wired to look horizontally across time. So you can use this, say I have a part to whole, which is where people typically use pie charts. You can use a bar graph, just like we saw earlier, to convey the same information and actually provide more information. And I'll explain that in just a moment. So the issue with pie charts is that it's really difficult to compare individual values, which we saw earlier, and increasing the chart size doesn't reveal more information, and it's difficult to compare combined values. So let's look at my crimes committed in my neighborhood graph again. Even if I could label them on each pie slice, it's still a little difficult to compare. So I've got this piece right here, this blue, light blue slice here. Is that the same amount as if I combine the several of these slices, this green, peach, and blue? Well, it's a little difficult to tell. What if I zoom in? Does that help me? Not really. The issue actually is that they've done scientific studies to find out that we are good at judging length, a single dimension, but human eyes and brains are actually not as good at judging angles. So pie charts cause us to have to judge angles and areas to determine the sizes and relative sizes to other things, and that's not our strong suit. So when you have your busy executive or anyone, we're all busy these days, who just needs the information, you want to make sure you highlight the important part. Why not use appropriate graph types to help them out, make their eyes focus on what's important, and not have to sit there and think about it a long time to get the information that they need out of it. So these are some newer graph types that are actually very effective at communicating information, in addition to they don't take up very much space. So if you're designing dashboards, or just reports with a lot of information, a bullet chart or a spark line could be very helpful to you. Bullet charts were created by Stephen Few. They have a really small footprint, as I mentioned, and they're linear. So this can replace gauges, those big gauges that kind of look like they came off your car. You can do that in a single line. You can make a whole table of bullet charts and have all of your key performance indicators right there in one table. So there are actually design specs for a bullet graph, and you can download those on the web. They're free. And they'll teach you how to use this. This is available in reporting services, I think as of 2008. It might be 2008 R2. So you can make these natively in SSRS. This one chart will actually show you the amount, the goal, and ranges of acceptability. So you see in the gray shading here, there were 3 ranges. And you can choose, where those sit. That's a lot of information in a single line. Spark lines are also in a similar vein. They convey a lot of information in a small amount of space. So those were invented by Tufte. You've probably seen a spark line. One of the most common places, popular places to see it is on Google Finance. So they're usually referred to as word-sized. They're really small, they're clear and compact. You can actually use them in a single line. You could use them in a paragraph. They can tell you a trend over time. So here we see the 3M stock, and I can see over the last time period, what was the high point, what's the low point, where is it at now, all in this tiny little area. So in general, graphs are great to help you understand trends compared to tables where people have to take in a lot of information and kind of hold it in memory at once. But using a graph doesn't have to take up a lot of space, as you can see from the bullet chart and the spark lines. And spark lines are available in reporting services as well, in addition to Excel. So one concept that I think could help quite a bit as you design your data visualizations is the data to ink ratio. And all it means is, and I guess ink is a little bit old-fashioned since we don't print anymore, but this was developed by Tufte several years ago, back when we did print everything still. So the idea is, of all of the, quote, ink on the page, how much of it is actually used to convey information, data, and how much of it is decoration. In addition, how much of it is redundant. You don't need to label things twice if you can keep it simple, basically. So there is a great example of this from Dark Horse Analytics. So they call it remove to improve. They took a graph about the calories per 100 grams for different foods. And we can see that here. We got French fries, potato chips, bacon, pizza, chili dog. And let's watch how they improved it. First, they removed the background. Then, they removed the background inside the graph. They're getting rid of the redundant labels. And then they'll remove borders. And then they'll reduce the colors. So in this case, they changed everything to gray, except bacon. They wanted to highlight the calories for bacon. This was important to whatever story they were trying to tell with their data. And then they got rid of the special effects and the bolding, because our focus isn't the labels as much as it is the data. So then they lightened the labels even more, and they lightened the lines. And they can actually remove all of the lines and not lose any information. And in fact, they can just directly label. They don't even need the scale or the lines at all. So this is our end result, and I would argue that it looks much more professional than where it started, and it's easier to read. So being kind of minimalist about your graph actually makes it more effective and probably more professional looking. It can still look pretty cool without all the extra decoration. All right. In the same vein is chart junk. Chart junk is all that extra decoration that doesn't need to be there, that's actually probably hindering people from understanding what you're trying to tell them. So some things about chart junk that we saw in the example are keeping grid lines light and even removing them when necessary. Another thing is to avoid 3D presentation of 2D data. What that means is if you only have 2 dimensions to your data, you don't need a 3D graph. So for example, I have a couple graphs at the bottom here. We'll zoom in. So this was measuring something about the good, the bad, and the ugly. And it's got 3D bar charts. It's a little difficult to tell where these bars end. Do they end at the front light part? Or do they end in the back in the dark? You can't quite tell. You always have to sit there and look at it and decide for yourself. Another example is if you're going to use pie charts, 3D pie charts skew your data. So same data, we saw the ugly was about 20-something%. The bad is a little less than 35, and the good is more than 35. Those numbers don't look like that in this pie chart because of the angle, because we made it 3D. Our idea of the proportion that each slice takes up is pretty skewed. So Tufte has a term called we used a computer to build a duck syndrome. What he means is kind of the point to take away from that is that just because it's there, new, possible, shiny, doesn't mean that you should use it. Basically, your goal is not really to create something cool. Your goal is to communicate your data. So don't lose sight of what you're really trying to do for the sake of technology. The next concept that's very important is sufficient context. Graphics must not quote data out of context. That is a quote from Tufte. So what do I mean by context? Well, let's say you have a report about sales. And I tell you sales are $5 million. Well, is that good or bad? So maybe I give you an indicator. It's green, and so you know it's good. Well, how good is it? You know, is that compared to a goal? Is it compared to a historical number? Is it way over the goal, or is it just barely meeting the goal? You know, those are questions that people may need to answer to be able to make use of this data. Because we make reports so that people can take action on them. If they're not taking action, they're not at least learning something and asking questions, there's not really a point to it. So is the data historically good or bad? Even if you have a goal for now and we're saying, yes, we met our goal, maybe we didn't meet our goal. Maybe it's still red. But maybe over the last 6 months, we're getting less and less red. So maybe we're actually doing well historically, but we're still bad compared to our goal. Another good question to consider is how much precision makes sense. If you're a big multi-million-dollar company, you probably don't care about the pennies on your sales report. You can probably round to the nearest 1,000 and you would be just fine. So it's getting in the way for the people making decisions off of sales reports to show them all the way down to the penny. So I'd like to show you an example in reporting services of one small thing you can do to help ensure you are providing context. So I've gone back to my data set of the crimes committed in Kansas City, and I just made a quick tabular report. And I'm not against tables of data. You may need this for a certain purpose. This may be an intermediate step that you're going to use this for another application. There may be a reason why you have a table full of data. So I'll show you what it looks like right now. We've got reported date, the report number, what the offense was, the area or beat, the address and the zip code. And it's a couple pages long. But when I go to the second page, I've lost my headers. I don't see the titles for each of these columns anymore. So if you have a multi-page report, sometimes it can be difficult to remember, and you don't want your users having to flip back and forth. Oh yeah, but you've seen there's a checkbox for that. So, keep my header rows on each page. It's already checked. Well, why didn't we see it? Well, it's kind of I'll call it a usability bug. Just because you have that checked doesn't mean that your column headers are going to show up. So what you have to do is on your column groups, there's a little down arrow, and change it to advanced mode. And then under row groups, if it's just a normal table, you'll have this one static row group. So you'll go to the properties. You can hit F4, or I think you can right-click and get to it. There is, and I'll zoom in here, a property called Repeat on New Page. And just because you checked that checkbox doesn't mean that this got flipped. This is what has to change. So I changed that to true. And then I'll preview my report again. And when I go to the second page, now I will see the headers for each column. So it's just a small example of sufficient context. Make sure you keep the labels on things where they need to be so that people understand what they're looking at. All right, component design. I referenced the concept of pre-attentive processing without actually calling it that. Pre-attentive processing is the perception of basic visual attributes without conscious effort. What that means is, before you really try to examine a report, a graph, or really anything, your eyes and your brain have already taken in some information without you trying. There are pre-attentive attributes, things that your eyes and brain notice immediately before they really start studying whatever they're looking at. And so I included them in the little box on the right. You'll see a couple of items. Orientation, you notice that line that's diagonal instead of up and down immediately. We're good at judging line length, which is why bar charts are so effective. You can kind of look through the other ones, and if you can see I have the images from a PDF by Stephen Hugh in Perceptual X, so you can go and find this. Color, intensity, and hue are a big thing. If you go and you learn about this, when you see most charts, it feels like they are screaming at you. So you can learn to use hue and intensity to highlight the important information and let everything else be there to support it, but not be so in your face. So what does this mean for bar charts? One thing is start your numerical scales at 0. We saw that earlier with the chart that the one on the left was starting at 2,000 while the one on the right was starting at 0. We're good at judging line length, and we take that as something meaningful. So make sure you start your scales at 0 on your bar chart so people can understand the differences between the lengths in lines. Another thing is to order bar charts by value. It helps us quickly size up those line lengths and compare between different categories without really having to try. And then use a single color in the bars of your bar charts. We tend to want to make it colorful, want to make your reports exciting, and that's good. but you're actually distracting people if you use lots of colors, different colors, for no reason. If there's a good reason to highlight, we saw one earlier, they highlighted bacon. They wanted us to pay attention to bacon, and that's okay. I think that's a great use of color, but use it meaningfully. Also, don't rotate your labels. I know it's really hard sometimes when you have a really long label on a vertical bar chart, but my advice would be try a horizontal bar chart. When people have to kind of tilt their head to look at those labels, you've stopped them looking at the data, and now they're having to go back and forth between the labels and the actual data. So you've lost the advantages of pre-attentive processing. So here's a good example bar chart. This actually came from, again, a Stephen Few article where he was kind of discussing, arguing with Seth Godin about good reports, good graphs, actually inside of PowerPoint, I think was the conversation. Godin created a colorful exploded pie chart to show that trolls were a big problem compared to other creatures. So Stephen Few took that and he made what he thought was a more appropriate visualization. So he used a better graph type. There's no chart jump in here. And there's a very high data to ink ratio. There's not a lot of ink, not a lot of pixels wasted on things that are just decorative, that don't provide information. So then the bars are ordered by value, as I talked about earlier. Our scale starts at 0. The labels are not rotated. And it uses the same color on all the bars except for the top one, which he wants to highlight, because the point was trolls are a big problem. So I'd like to show you how to make this in reporting services. And you're thinking, oh, it's just a bar chart, you just insert one and go for it. But what I want you to notice is how much you have to take out of your chart before it actually follows DataViz best practices. So I went ahead and made one, so you can see kind of what the end result would be in reporting services. And I gave it a label, problem creatures, and there's our trolls and everything else with our scale at the bottom. So I'm going to insert a chart, choose my bar. I'm going to go ahead and size this to fit the area I have. And I'm going to change my title. And I'm going to make the font gray and 14 point. So I put this big title in here because it's actually conveying information. This graph is about problem creatures. So then I'm going to remove the legend because I only have one measure. It's going to be obvious by the time we get done what we're talking about. We don't need the legend. And I'm going to remove axis titles. And then I'll add some data. So I'm going to put the type of creature in my category groups and the value in the values. And I'll format my horizontal axis to a percentage with no decimal points. And then I'm going to make sure I order my bars in descending order. And now I want to add the fill. So I'm going to use a formula that basically says if the value is the top value, make it black. Otherwise, make it gray. So let's check out what we have so far. We're getting there, but we still have a lot to remove. So I'll remove the major tick marks on each axis. And I'm actually going to change the line style to none. So I don't want that line going across the bottom of the axis because it's just not needed. And then I'm going to change my vertical axis font to 12 points. And I want to make sure my horizontal axis is labeled correctly, so I'm going to make sure that every 5% I get a label. And then, something a lot of people are not as familiar with, in your chart properties, chart series properties, if you look at custom attributes, this point width, this is determining the space in between your bars. So it's defaulted to 0.8, and I'm changing it to 0.5. So now I have my graph minus the border. Get rid of that. Now I have a nice clean graph. This is something that I would give to a client. But notice how much we had to take out. We had to take out the extra lines. We had to lighten the title, remove extra axis labels and legends and all of that. So fonts. Fonts are another thing that we want to be careful of. And there is no best font for data viz. It's more just about legibility and consistency. And no one has a hard and fast rule about whether to use serif or sans serif. The list of fonts on here are just some things that are acceptable. These are by no means the fonts. But just remember that emphasis and color can be used for grouping. And you want to make sure that you use the same font. So when you choose different fonts on different parts of your reports, people infer meaning from that. That or they just get distracted, like, why is this font different? It must mean something. What is it doing here? Why did it change? And rather than them spending time thinking about that, you want them to be spending time thinking about the information that you're trying to provide to them. Another important thing is color. So we can pre-attentively distinguish about 8 different hues. If you have more than 8 different colors on a graph, we can't hold it all in memory to keep track of them as we look at a single report. Another thing to remember is that fully saturated bright versions of colors. Those are the ones that demand attention. So you can see the color wheel on the bottom right. It's very bright. All of those are trying to grab my attention. So use that sparingly and tone down your hues a little bit so that people use color to help people know where to look instead of just things being bright and shiny. I have a couple of favorite tools that I like to use. One is Instant Eyedropper, and these are both free things. I'm going to exit my PowerPoint presentation for just a second so you can see Instant Eyedropper. It just sits in your system tray, and it's this little color wheel at the very bottom here. This guy. When I'm trying to determine colors, a lot of times I walk into a client site and maybe they have corporate colors. Maybe I kind of know what color I'm looking for, but it's not one of the predefined colors in reporting services. But I found it on a website or maybe on Color Combos, which is one of my other favorite tools. All you have to do with Instant Eyedropper is if it's running, just go click on it and hold it, and it will give you the hex value for any color that you hover over with your cursor. And it'll actually copy it and save it to your clipboard. So you could paste that right into reporting services to use as a color. Color Combos is actually a website, and people use it for all kinds of things. It's not just data visualization or websites. People are in there picking out wallpaper. If you need to see what colors look like together, that is a good site to do it. And there are several of them out there. I think there's Color Scheme, and use whatever makes you comfortable, but make sure you check out your colors together. So if you have a line chart with 6 lines on it, make sure that your colors look good together, that none of them are brighter or more demanding of attention than the others, unless you need for them to be, and that they're easily distinguishable. If the lines cross each other, are you going to get confused which color is what? So that's what I use color combos for. It lets you stack a bunch of colors together horizontally so you can see what they look like next to each other. So color palettes. We've been talking about colors in general, but you typically want to stick with a color palette consistently. And if you make this decision up front, you don't have to decide again for every other report. I can make reports very quickly, but if you ask me to decide on a color palette, it's going to take me a while. That's actually the slower part. So pick a color palette and then use it consistently in your report so you can actually build templates in reporting services to keep those colors so that everybody can start from the template and not have to redefine them. So there are multiple ways to indicate your color palette in reporting services, and Melissa Coates has a great article about each of these options. So I will show you some examples of indicating your color palette. The first thing we have is, again, we're back to my crime stats data. These are incidents by zip code. And it's just a single color on the bar chart because that's all I need. And this is the default color. So if I want to change this color, I right-click on the series, go to the properties, and see how it's automatic. You can actually change this to whatever you'd like. I'm going to choose pale turquoise. So that means that every bar that shows up in the graph will be this color because we've set it on the entire series. You can also do color palette. There are built-in color palettes in reporting services. So if you just make a graph, it's going to have a color palette ready for you, and this is, I believe, the default. It's a little bright and maybe a little crazy for my taste, so let's say I want to choose another one. In the properties on the chart, there is a palette option. So you just go to that, there's a drop down, and you can choose a new palette. So this palette to me looks a little better, a little more muted colors. That's bright pastel. So now I've used a different palette that's predetermined by reporting services. You can also do a custom palette. So it's the same idea. Your palette this time is custom, and you have to define your palette colors. So on the chart properties, there's a custom palette colors. And so I've actually gone through and defined 5 colors for my palette. But there's something to be aware of. If you have more items in your chart, more series than you do in your palette, it will repeat colors. So I have to make sure that I've defined at least enough on this chart. So if I remove that one, you see purple repeats. And you don't want that because then it gets really confusing. So make sure you've defined enough colors and realize that if it runs out of colors for the series, it will actually repeat. It'll just go through that order again. So the order I defined it is basically the order that it's going to use. So just add enough for your palette that you won't have repeating colors. You can also change the colors via expressions. So if I go to my series properties and I go to fill, there's an expression in here. And I told it if the incidents are greater than 6,000, I want it to be red. If it's less than 2,000, it's going to be green. And if it's somewhere in the middle, it's kind of an orangey yellow color. So now we can see, I've highlighted this to include some meaning behind it. And they're not super bright colors because I don't want it to scream at me. One thing to be aware of, though, is that you're going to have to copy and paste this expression into every graph if you do it this way. So there's actually another option, which is VB code. So this graph looks just like the other one, but I did something different. In your report properties, you can include code. So I wrote a function that does exactly the same thing. So here we see again, if the number is above 6,000, red. If it's less than 2,000, green. Otherwise, it's orange or yellow, whatever. That function in and of itself has to be called. So in my series properties, in the fill, I have an expression that is code.fillColor because that's the name of my function, and then I pass it a number, the value that's represented in each bar. And that is what makes that work. So you've got several options. So as a data professional, I believe it's our job to take something that's chaotic and difficult to understand and turn it into something meaningful and insightful. And I've included a few web resources here for you. So if you're curious, you'd like to learn more, even some of the demos that I did, these links reference that. And then I've also got some recommended books on data visualizations and reporting services specifically that I think are great references. So that wraps up my presentation. I don't know if there are any questions or anything. If you'd like to contact me later, I'm on Twitter, or you can go to my blog.
Great. Thanks, Megan. That was wonderful. Great job touching on the data visualization principles and good examples. Great content. Thanks so much for doing this. We do have a few questions here. The main questions we're wondering about getting a copy of your slides. So I thought if you have not sent those to us, if you could get those sent to us, and then we can post them on the past BAVC site. They'll be posted along with the event. And we'll also upload this video as well, so both links will be available and posted to the actual event. Some other questions were, someone was wondering if there's an online lab platform that they could use to try out this software. So maybe if they don't have it available on their own PC to use.
Yes, I believe there's some kind of, Microsoft offers some kind of BI quick start where you can do some labs. You can get free versions. I know there is a version of SQL Server that includes reporting services. I can't remember if it's developer with advanced services. And you can download for free and try it out.
Yep. Yeah, there are some SQL Server virtual labs, and people can definitely download and install the developer edition. And then I know there's like an online site that I'm aware of called reportsurfer.com, and that actually allows, that has some demos that you can test out, as well as if you have an account, you can actually upload your own reports to run there too. So, and the SQL Server Express, of course, that is a free one that people can download with the advanced capabilities to get reporting services. Let's see, more questions about getting copies of the slides. Everyone wants to see the slides so they can reference your links there. Someone was inquiring if the bullet charts and spark lines are available in Performance Point. Are you aware of that?
They are not. In fact, I don't see Microsoft investing a lot in Performance Point in the future. I imagine with all the Power BI that's come out, especially since Power BI will be supporting reporting services, that you'll see more investment in that area. I still make a few Performance Point dashboards in SharePoint for clients, but what I do is use them as a container for Excel or reporting services. So like someone answered, use the reporting services bullet charts or spark lines and embed them in your Performance Point dashboards. You can make it so even if you have one part that's Excel and one part that's reporting services and one part that is the native Performance Point engine for rendering charts, that it looks fairly seamless. So don't feel like you're required to use the Performance Point charting engine. Know that you actually have several options when you make a Performance Point dashboard.
Yep, definitely. You can reference reporting services in Excel. Those are great options to enhance your Performance Point dashboards. Yeah, I think that's... Do you think Microsoft is deprecating reporting services in favor of Power Pivot and Power View, or even Excel reporting?
No. In fact, they're including reporting services in Power BI now. I think those technologies play different roles, so Microsoft is beginning to do a good job of covering, do I want data discovery tools? Do I want some just really quick presentation ready things like Power View? They're corporate reporting where you need very customized and standardized templates, I don't think will ever go away. And I think they know that too. And I know they haven't invested a lot in reporting services, but they did just make the announcement that reporting services will be included in Power BI. I think there'll probably be a lag as companies have to adopt Office 365 to move to this kind of new platform of Office 365 with Power BI. So you may not get all the great features in your current environments if you've not already moved to cloud-based technologies. But I think there'd be a big uproar if reporting services went away with no replacement for that area of reporting.
Correct. Yep. Yeah, with the announcement with reporting services going to be coming out in Power BI this summer, I think definitely shows you that Microsoft is still investing in reporting services. Mm-hmm. Someone else was inquiring if Power View supports any of these new visualizations, such as the bullet charts and spark lines.
No, they don't. Not yet. I know there was a Ask Me Anything on Reddit where people asked the Power BI team a lot of questions and that they're looking at new visualizations to be included. There are spark lines in basic Excel, and there are lots of blog posts out there about how to make a bullet chart in Excel. So don't forget that Excel online, you can render basic Excel reports in Office 365 online. You're not limited to Power View. So you can mix. You can have a workbook with some Power View reports and some just basic Excel reports in the same workbook that people can access online.
Yes, all right. Well, I think our time is coming to an end here. Do you have any parting last words or wisdom for everyone? Put you on the spot.
I just want to say thank you to everyone for attending, and thank you to you, Dan and Paris, for asking me to come and speak and letting me do this. And happy data visiting. I hope you learned something.
Great, Megan. Thanks. Appreciate you taking the time out of your day to do this presentation for everyone. I know we had over 170 attendees, so I know people got some good, useful information. And we'll definitely get that information posted to the event on our website, hopefully later today, so it'll be available for everyone tomorrow. Thanks, everyone, for attending, and have a good day.